Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I've been a long-haul trucker for over 20 years now, clocked over 1 million miles total back and forth across this great country of ours. I've hauled every kind of cargo you can imagine and navigated every treacherous mountain pass and lonesome highway out there. But nothing could have prepared me for that bone-chilling stretch of highway outside of Elko, Nevada. The truckers have a name for it, Phantom Alley. It started out as a routine job. Pick up a load of automotive parts in Salt Lake City and deliver them up to a distribution center in Boise. I'd made the 800-plus mile journey countless times before without incident. But when I swung by the dispatch office, my supervisor warned me to take the long way and steer clear of Highway 93 through Nevada. He had a real grave look in his eyes as he told me the stories that had been circulating for years about the troubling paranormal phenomena along that desolate stretch of desert highway. Truckers like me are a superstitious bunch, but I laughed it off at first. Ghost stories were for kids sitting around a campfire, not hardy road warriors like myself. That Nevada route was the most direct path and would save me time and miles, and I prided myself on prompt deliveries, so I saw no reason to take a winding detour through Idaho just to avoid some phantom stories. It was about 11 p.m. when I first merged onto the pitch-black two-lane Highway 93 outside of Wells, Nevada. I was on schedule to pass through Elko and make it to Twin Falls by sunrise. The first couple of hours were uneventful, just me and the occasional jackrabbit darting across the asphalt. I cracked a window to let the brisk night air keep me alert. Thousands of stars glittered coldly overhead in the moonless sky. Aside from the low rumble of the diesel engine, it was silent as a graveyard out there. Around 1 a.m., I passed through the tiny town of Lemuel. After that, there was nothing ahead of me but 80 miles of darkness and sagebrush-dotted wilderness. That's when the first strange occurrence happened. Without warning, a bone-chilling cold descended inside the cab of the truck. It was as if someone had suddenly cranked the AC up to full blast in the dead of winter. I was scared involuntarily and my teeth started to chatter. Reaching forward, I turned the heat all the way up and the fan down low, but the frigid air remained. I rubbed my arms briskly, trying to warm up as goosebumps prickled my skin. Must be a freak draft coming in somewhere, I thought. But just as suddenly as it started, the cold air vanished. The dashboard thermometer steadied back at a normal temperature. I shrugged off the unexplained chill as a fluke. About 20 miles later, the radio started acting haywire. I had tuned it to a country classic station out of Elko that came in crystal clear earlier. But now the signal kept slipping into static and fading out entirely. I fussed with the tuner knob but couldn't get it to hold steady. Strange garbled voices drowned out the music like multiple radio stations were bleeding together through the white noise. Maybe electromagnetic interference from solar flares or some such thing, I reasoned. After a few minutes of futzing with the antiquated radio controls, the signal faded back in. Willie Nelson crooned about being on the road again. Crisis averted. But the strangeness was just getting started. I was jarred out of highway hypnosis an hour later when the cab was suddenly filled with spectral whispers. At first I thought the radio was malfunctioning again. But the whispers seemed to come from directly behind me, from the empty sleeper compartment. The hair on the back of my neck stood at attention. I craned my head back, but there was nothing there, of course. Just my imagination playing tricks on me in the dead of night. When I faced forward again, the whispers stopped as abruptly as they started. I turned the radio up louder, trying to drown out any return of the disembodied voices. Around 3:30 a.m., the desert silence was shattered by the piercing blare of the check engine alarm. The temperature gauge was pinned in the red, steam hissing from beneath the hood, a clear sign the engine was dangerously overheated. But that made no damn sense, as I'd just had the rig serviced and checked over from top to bottom before setting out. I pulled onto the shoulder, put on the hazards, and popped the hood. But in the beam of my flashlight, I couldn't find any sign of a leak, busted hose, or other mechanical issue that would cause it to run so hot. It was as if the laws of physics had been turned upside down. After half an hour of watching the temp gauge, the needle finally settled back down to normal. No choice but to chalk it up to the ghosts of Phantom Alley, I reckoned. Dawn's rosy fingers were just creeping over the horizon when the apparition appeared. I was scanning the shoulder as I always do, looking for stray animals or debris ahead. About 50 yards up, I spotted a flickering light like the beam of a flashlight. As it got closer, it took on a human shape, waving its ghostly arms as if trying to flag me down. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I felt a shudder of primal fear course through me. There was someone out here after all, but as my headlights illuminated the area, the figure vanished into thin air. No one was there, just a sagebrush landscape, same as the rest of the godforsaken highway. I floored the accelerator, racing to get beyond the bounds of Phantom Alley. When I finally crossed the Idaho state line, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. By the time I filled up at a truck stop outside of Twin Falls, the paranormal events seemed like a bad dream conjured up by exhaustion and the mind's overactive imagination. But inside, other drivers shared similar tales of ghostly rides through that haunted Nevada highway. Their haunted eyes told the truth. One old-timer swore he saw a phantom semi headed straight for his rig, only for it to disappear seconds before impact. A younger guy's beard turned snow white during his passage, though he was barely 30 years old. We sat and swapped stories like veterans of a war, bound by the shared ordeal of surviving Phantom Alley's spectral onslaught. I tell you one thing's for certain. After that trip, I told my dispatcher to keep me the hell away from Highway 93, no matter how many miles or hours it adds. Whatever haunts that isolated stretch of asphalt can keep it. The paycheck isn't worth dealing with haunted highways and mechanical phantoms. I'll gladly stick to the longer haul through Utah, where the only thing that goes bump in the night is jackrabbits. Call me superstitious if you want, but now I know the truth. There are some places in this world that are left to the dead. The hypnotic yellow lines on the highway had started to blur together hours ago. I had been pushing through the night for far too long, trying to meet my delivery deadline. My eyes strained against the darkness, aided only by the truck's flickering headlights piercing the pitch-black road ahead. Bleary-eyed and lead-footed, I knew I couldn't go on like this much longer without rest. Up ahead, an illuminated sign appeared like a beacon through the inky night. A rest area, next exit. I eagerly maneuvered the lumbering rig off the highway and down the ramp, reaching the deserted parking lot in desperate need of respite. Pulling into a space on the far side, beneath a dim overhead light, I put the truck in park and leaned back, taking a moment to rest my weary eyes. Silence filled the cab, the rumbling engine now quieted. This place seemed almost too quiet, in fact, an isolated oasis in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town. Unease prickled at me as I took in my surroundings. Maybe isolating myself out here in the dead of night wasn't the wisest idea. I turned the key, firing the truck back to life, suddenly intent on getting back on the road. Just as I was about to pull out, however, exhaustion hit me like a brick wall. My blurred vision and leading eyelids made it clear I wasn't going any farther tonight until I got some rest. Begrudgingly, I cut the engine again and climbed into the sleeper cab, hoping sleep would rejuvenate me enough to keep driving. Settling into the hard mattress, I set an alarm on my phone to make sure I wouldn't oversleep. As I drifted off, the world around me faded away. For a brief moment, it felt peaceful, but just as I teetered on the precipice of sleep, a noise in the distance startled me awake. The sound of footsteps, meandering slowly outside of the darkness. My pulse quickened as I sat upright and listened intently. Who else could be lurking out there at this hour? I crept to the window and peered out cautiously from behind the curtains into the parking lot. It was too dim to see anything clearly, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was out there roaming in the shadows. I pulled the curtains closed and tried to convince myself it was just an animal scavenging, but the uneasy feeling still gnawed at me as I lay back down. Exhaustion eventually overpowered my nerves and I managed to doze off, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake again by an even more chilling sound, hushed whispers coming from directly outside the truck cab. The garbled words were too quiet to comprehend, but the sinister tone turned my blood to ice. This was no animal. Someone or something was whispering inexplicable things just on the other side of the thin metal walls. Every hair on my body stood at attention. I didn't dare move or breathe. Paralyzed by fear, I could only listen helplessly as the ominous whispers gradually faded before stopping altogether. Anxious minutes passed in silence as I strained my ears in the darkness, no longer able to keep my eyes shut. All I could hear was the thunderous pounding of my own heart. Finally convinced the whispers were gone, I fumbled for my phone and turned on its flashlight. I had to get out and investigate whatever was lurking outside my truck. Cautiously, I cracked the door open and swept the vicinity with the phone's wavering beam. Nothing. The parking lot appeared vacant, without a soul in sight. Everything was still except for a light breeze tussling the trees. The whispers had vanished like ghosts into the night. Despite seeing no one around, my gut told me something was very wrong here. I had to get back on the highway. Now, I started the truck and steered it towards the lot's exit, pressing hard on the accelerator. But as the vehicle gained speed, the overhead lamps suddenly cut out, casting everything into impenetrable darkness. Before I could even react, the truck sputtered and died. Confused, I turned the key over and over to no avail as a feeling of dread settled into my bones. The engine was completely dead, the dashboard lights all extinguished. I was stranded alone in the dark, with no idea what had killed the truck's engine, or what was out there lurking in the shadows. I nervously scanned the darkness with my phone's flashlight. Its dim glow only illuminated a small swatch of the area immediately around me. As I craned my neck to look farther, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures emerging, creeping steadily towards the stranded truck. Too many to count, their forms only faint silhouettes as they staggered across the parking lot. But their erratic, jerking movements were enough to confirm they were not human. Frozen in fear, I could only watch as they shambled closer, wailing and groaning hauntingly. Their gangly limbs propelled them forward at an eerie, stilted gait that was bone-chilling to witness. I panicked, stabbing frantically at the ignition and pumping the gas pedal. But it was useless. The truck remained dead, trapping me helplessly inside. Within seconds, the beings had surrounded the truck, pounding and scraping at the metal exterior with crooked, claw-like appendages. Their ghastly faces leered at me through the windows, sunken eyes burning with malevolent hunger. I cowered low in my seat, praying I would somehow escape this nightmare. Their ominous wailing intensified as they rocked the truck back and forth, their wretched faces filling my vision no matter where I looked. After what seemed like an eternity of torment, their chilling cries finally faded as they slunk away into the shadows. I don't know what compelled them to leave, if they had gotten what they came for or would return again soon, but I didn't wait to find out. As the first dim glow of dawn peeked over the horizon, I turned the ignition and miraculously the truck rumbled to life once more. I peeled out of that cursed place full of renewed terror, lucky to be escaping it all. I'll never know what those creatures were or why they targeted my truck that night, but the chilling memory will haunt me forever, a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unlikely and isolated places. I pray I never encounter those sinister beings again in this life or the next, because I know in my heart they were not of this earth. Driving trucks long haul for as many years as I have, you see all kinds out on the open highway. Families packed in minivans headed to vacation, traveling salesmen moving between cities, even the occasional hitchhiker trying to catch a lift to the next town over. I'd never bothered stopping for them, though. Figured picking up a stranger was asking for trouble. But that changed a few nights ago, and I've been regretting it ever since. It was getting late, sunset fading in the rear view as I still had several hours left to drive. The hypnotic yellow lines streaking by were making my eyelids heavy. I blinked hard and checked the clock, not even 9 p.m. Still too early to call it a night. I rubbed my eyes and glanced back at the road, and that's when I saw him. A scrawny fellow in office clothes standing there jutting his thumb out. Now, normally, I wouldn't even consider stopping. But something about this guy made me ease my foot off the gas. He just looked so out of place. Buttoned-down shirt, khakis, and loafers, like he was on his way home from the office, not trekking solo down some deserted back road. Before I knew it, I was pulling over. He hustled up all grateful-like as I reached across to push open the passenger door. Said his name was Carl. Thanked me sincerely for stopping. Mentioned he was trying to visit family a few counties east. Seemed innocent enough. I nodded and put the truck back in drive, figuring I'd just drop him at the next exit ramp and be on my way. At first, we just drove in silence, the dark countryside rolling past outside. But soon enough, he was rambling about his work and going on about accounts or earnings or some such office talk. Didn't make a lick of sense to me, but I kept one hand polite on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead as he prattled on. Maybe half an hour later, I started to feel something was off. Carl was fidgeting around in his seat, foot tapping incessantly, mannerisms growing more nervous and erratic. He'd trail off mid-sentence, lose his train of thought, then pick back up on something completely unrelated. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to let out my growing unease. I kept hoping the next town's lights would appear over the horizon. But the miles of darkness just kept rolling by. Carl grew more agitated, shifting around, mumbling under his breath. He'd go silent for stretches, just staring ahead with a peculiar grin. Then he burst out with random phrases or song lyrics like a crazy person. My pulse was picking up. I knew I needed to get this guy out of my cab, but there was nowhere to pull over, not another car in sight. I almost drove straight off the road when Carl suddenly started clawing at the door, trying to fling himself out at 60 miles per hour. I had to slam the brakes and shove him hard back into his seat, hollering for him to get a hold of himself. He went limp for a minute, giggling strangely, murmuring who knows what. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to just keep driving. Had to make it to the next town. By the time I saw lights glowing up ahead, I could barely keep the truck on the road. Carl was right back at it, scrambling to try and jump out every chance he got. Man was deranged, laughing like a lunatic no matter how much I yelled. I blew through a red light, just trying to get within sight of other people. Soon as I slowed near the outskirts, Carl bolted, threw himself out, and took off running full sprint into the dark. Part of me wanted to chase him down, make sure he didn't go hurt someone. I was too rattled. I pulled over in a parking lot, rested my head on the steering wheel as my pulse finally slowed. Not sure how long I sat there, just breathing deep, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. Eventually I got myself together enough to drive, wanting nothing but to get as many miles between me and that maniac as possible. I stopped at the first motel I saw, and barely slept all night. Kept having visions of that freak's deranged laughter, his clawing hands trying to wrench open the door. I got back on the road the next morning purely on autopilot, exhausted but determined to deliver my load on time. Couldn't stop replaying the night before in my head, wondering how I could have been so stupid to let that hitchhiker in my truck. I barely remember driving the next 200 miles, my nerves still completely frayed. Started questioning if I wanted to keep doing this job, whether I should try and find something closer to home. But by the time I finally reached my destination, unloaded my cargo, I knew I had to get back on the road. Driving's what I know I'm good at. Can't let one bad experience keep me from doing what I love. But I'll tell you one thing, it'll be a cold day in hell before I make the mistake of picking up another hitchhiker again. Just can't trust who's out there anymore. Should have trusted my instincts and kept on driving that night, instead of letting that madman into my cab. Lesson learned the hard way, that's for sure. From here on out, any soul trying to thumb a ride is just gonna have to find another truck to flag down. Cause this one right here ain't stopping. The drone of tires on blacktop lulled me into a trance as I drove through the night. Glancing at the clock, I blearily made out the time, 12:47 a.m. I'd been on the road for over 8 hours straight, fueled by truck stop coffee and sheer determination to make this delivery on time. The endless highway was deserted, streetlights casting lonely pools of light across the pavement. My eyes strained against the darkness, searching for my exit. Up ahead, the warehouse finally emerged from the shadows. An oasis of fluorescent lights in a sea of night. I coasted the rig into the empty loading bay, the rumble of my diesel engine shattering the heavy silence. Cutting the ignition, I glanced around warily as the headlights faded. The cavernous building loomed over me, seeming to swallow the scant light that crept in from outside. I suppressed a chill. Focus, I told myself. Just get this delivery done and get out. The trailer doors groaned in protest as I hauled them open. Inside, the pallets of boxes seemed to multiply in the dimness. I stifled a weary sigh, bracing myself for the laborious unloading process ahead. Hoisting myself up into the trailer, I got to work. As I began moving boxes, the click of my boots on concrete echoed jarringly in the stillness. No forklifts beeping, no chatter of workers unloading beside me. The sheer emptiness around me felt oppressive. I pushed on, muscles burning, eager to finish this delivery and escape the heavy silence weighing down on me. That's when I first heard it, a faint skittering sound drifting from the rear of the warehouse. I paused, listening intently until it repeated, the unmistakable scampering of tiny claws. Just rats. I assured myself, can't let yourself get spooked. Stay focused. I quickened my pace, working feverishly as the rodent's relentless scurrying continued in the distance. The grating sound needled my nerves. I found myself glancing frequently over my shoulder into the shadows behind me, irrationally expecting to see beady red eyes peering back at me just out of sight. But there was only inky darkness receding between the shelves, the contents vanishing into black voids. At long last, I stacked the final pallet and did one last check that the trailer was empty. Sliding the doors closed with an echoing metallic bang, I crossed the loading bay cautiously. My boots clicked jarringly loud across the concrete, amplified by the stillness. I passed through aisles cluttered with inventory, but not a soul stirred. Where was everyone? Rounding the corner, I drew up short. The floor ahead was littered with trash, candy wrappers, empty soda cans, crumpled magazines. Someone had been here recently. I scanned the aisles apprehensively, but saw no movement, heard nothing but the relentless scuttling drawing ever nearer. The hair on my neck prickled. Hello. My voice rang out and faded unanswered. I hurried towards the flickering exit sign ahead, pulse racing. I had to get out of this place. Passing a stack of crates, a flash of color caught my eye. Tucked out of sight lay a filthy blanket, scattered clothes and belongings, a worn paperback, half-empty pill bottle, an old shirt. Was someone living here? Before I could ponder further, a resounding crash echoed from the end of the aisle. I spun towards the sound, peering wildly into the gloom. Who's there? Silence answered. Heart pounding, I lunged for the exit door, fumbling desperately with the lock until it finally swung open. A blast of frigid air rushed in, carrying a rank, meaty stench that made my stomach churn. I choked back bile and burst outside into the cold night. I sprinted for the truck, keys clenched painfully tight in my fist. The parking lot lights illuminated deserted tarmac, casting shadows between the warehouse walls. I searched the dark windows for any sign of movement, but saw none. Still couldn't escape the primal gut feeling of being watched. I scrambled into the cab and locked the doors, hands trembling as I turned the key in the ignition. The headlights flared to life, flooding the loading bay in harsh white light. Still no one. Backing cautiously out of the lot, I scored the building's facade for any approaching figures, but it remained pitch black and eerily still. I pulled onto the open highway, an overwhelming urge to put distance between myself and that place. Streetlights flashed hypnotically past as I drove into the night, trying in vain to rationalize what I'd experienced back there. Just a few vagrants seeking shelter, some reckless kids messing around. None of it explained the sinister energy that had permeated the very air, raising the hair on my arms and neck. Something malevolent haunted the shadows of that warehouse. The lingering memory of it sent a chill down my spine. Exhaustion finally forced me to pull into a deserted rest stop as dawn's rosy fingers crept over the horizon. I desperately needed to walk around, splash water on my face. But when I swung open the truck door, my breath seized in my chest. Right there below the handle, someone had crudely scratched an odd symbol into the paint. I leaped out and frantically circled the truck, my worst fears confirmed. The same jagged, cryptic markings were etched at odd intervals all along both sides of the cab. When the hell did this happen? How did I not notice before now? My mind raced back to the warehouse parking lot, that primal, hair-raising sense of unseen eyes tracking my every move. Whoever or whatever inhabited that place, whatever sinister presence dwelled in its shadows, it had followed me, marked me, staked its claim. I jumped back into the truck and slammed the door, locking it tight. I searched the deserted rest stop apprehensively, but saw no one. Still, a profound disquiet filled me. I pulled cautiously back onto the highway, unable to escape the chilling revelation that whatever malevolent entity lurked in the darkness of that warehouse knew I had trespassed on its domain, and it didn't want me coming back. The open road beckoned ahead, promising escape, but glancing in the rearview mirror, I glimpsed the eerie symbols etched onto my truck, a lingering reminder of the evil that had found me. A primal fear gnawed at me, knowing I could drive 1,000 miles and never truly leave that place behind. I've been a trucker for going on 23 years now. In that time, I've driven hundreds of thousands of miles across this country of ours. When you spend so much time on the open road, you're bound to see some peculiar things out there in the middle of nowhere. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer terror I experienced last Tuesday night. It started like any other haul. I was due to pick up a load in Memphis heading out west towards Dallas. As the sun was setting, I merged onto I-40 and settled in for the long drive ahead. With the lights of the city fading behind me, an inky darkness descended over the rural highway. About an hour outside Memphis, the lanes narrowed to two and traffic petered out to just the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite direction. It was just me, the pale glow of my high beams cutting through the night, and mile after endless mile of shadowy fields streaming past my windows. Around 10 p.m., I spotted a solitary figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Now and Mama had always warned me never to pick up hitchhikers. You don't know the type of unsavory characters that might be roaming about, she would say. But there was something about this man that tugged at my heartstrings. He looked to be in real rough shape, clothes threadbare and caked with dirt, dark stubble lining his hollow cheeks. As I pulled up alongside him, I could see hope flickering behind the wariness in his eyes. Against my better judgment, I called out to ask where he was headed. West, came the reply, his voice raspy with disuse. Well, westward was my direction too, and with Dallas still many hours ahead, I figured there'd be no harm in some companionship. I nodded for him to hop on into the passenger seat. He murmured a thank you as he climbed in and slid the door closed. We drove on without speaking for some time, the miles rolling by in silence. I snuck a few sideways glances at my quiet passenger, still uneasy about having this unknown drifter sitting shotgun. But his eyes remained fixed on the dark road ahead, giving no indication that he posed any threat. Eventually, the extended quiet began to feel suffocating. I tried striking up some light conversation to cut through the tension, commenting on the weather or asking if he'd ridden this stretch of highway before. His replies were terse, muted. Before long, an uneasy pall clouded the cab, pressing down on us from all sides. Subtly, gradually, I realized that the already minimal sounds of movement from the passenger seat had ceased. No rustle of cloth as he shifted in his seat, no clearing of the throat or sniffing. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see he was sitting stock still, his posture stiff and unnatural. A prickle of unease crept up my neck. I reached out my hand to gently shake him by the shoulder and ask if he was all right. But an inch from touching him, some instinct stopped me short, made me pull back. Everything about him seemed off all of a sudden. The way he was frozen so perfectly still, the total silence emanating from his very being. It wasn't natural, wasn't human. My heart began jackhammering against my ribs. Gripping the wheel tight to stop my hands from shaking, I eased the truck onto the narrow shoulder and shifted into park. The twin beams of the headlights illuminated the road ahead like spotlights on an empty stage. It was time to confront whatever was sitting next to me. Hey buddy, you all right over there? My voice sounded thin and frail, piercing the silence. He remained motionless as a statue, not so much as twitching at the question. Fighting the panic rising in my throat, I timidly reached toward his shoulder once more. But as my fingertips were about to graze the fabric of his shirt, he turned his head and my breath caught with a horrified gasp. Where I should have been, two fathomless black voids stared back at me, seeming to swallow all light. No emotion, no humanity, just endless, empty blackness boring into my soul. Pure primal fear shot through my veins like lightning. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't natural, it wasn't right. I had to get as far away from it as possible. Flinging open the door, I practically fell out of the cab in my haste to escape. As I sprinted into the darkness, the sound of my boots pounding the pavement echoed like gunshots in the still countryside. Daring a glance back, I glimpsed the silhouette of the hitchhiker still sitting there motionless in the passenger seat, watching me go with those horrible empty eyes. The sight sent my heart leaping into my throat. I ran and ran, not daring to stop or look back until the glow of the headlights had faded into the distance. Collapsing in an empty field, I gasped for breath, willing my hammering heart to slow down before I had a heart attack right there. Nothing pursued me out of the darkness, the only sound that of the gentle wind sighing through the grass. After what felt like hours, I shakily made my way back to the truck. I approached cautiously, half expecting the thing to still be lying in wait inside. As the cab door came into view, a tremendous wave of relief crashed over me at the sight of it standing wide open, the passenger seat now empty. The hitchhiker, or whatever sinister force had been masquerading as a man, was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished just as mysteriously as it had appeared. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors, peeling away from the side of the road. I kept the cabin light on, needing the security of illumination to banish the dark shadows pressing in around me. The remaining hours until sunrise passed in a jittery blur. Each pair of headlights coming towards me on the highway set my pulse skyrocketing until I was ready to scream. By the time pink and orange streaked across the horizon, heralding a new day, I could finally breathe normally again. As the sun slowly dissolved the last pockets of night in its warm glow, I allowed myself to accept that whatever evil had visited me was gone. I still had no clue as to its true nature. I'm not sure I ever want to know. But one thing's for certain, I will never again pick up a hitchhiker roaming the back roads after dark. The empty highways belong to the shadows, and to the sinister things that hide within. My rig will remain a light against the gathering dark, occupied by just me until journey's end.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.